Today we're going to be discussing tropes. As many of you would remember, back in 20 not current year, there was this lovely young feminist called Anita Sarkar-Karkarkizian. She managed to raise a lot of money to make a series of videos on tropes in video games, and how each of those in turn were inherently bad. Now, over the course of the 2 years where she didn't release all the videos she said she would release, it came out that she wasn't really a gamer. But she received lots of harassment, so naturally that didn't matter. This led to the rise of many shitlords, as they were once called. This doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things, as I want to focus on tropes, but I thought I'd just mention it because I came around that time, kind of. Tropes are in many different areas of life, and entertainment most notably. Video games, there are obvious tropes, but I think as games have progressed more to be certainly popular online, storytelling isn't as important as it once was, in favour of season passes and microtransactions through the teeth. In fact, if you have any teeth, sell them so you can get another season pass for Fortnite. I'm sure the Tooth Fairy will oblige. In music, there are obvious tropes as well, and also cliches, with certain genres being filled by certain types of people. Those that come from the block, the hood, the mega mansions, or those that have the mega mansion, and then those who subsequently had a mega mansion but spent all their money on, quotes, hoes and ex-wives. The style of music and the story they tell within the music itself being where some of the tropes come from. And then we move to another area of entertainment, the movie industry. Now this is chock full of tropes. Some good, perceived good that is, some bad, perceived bad that is. These are the tropes we're going to be focusing on for today's video, more notably, those of the villain in movies. At the moment, the most common type of villain I've noticed, the one that stands out as the big bad, is either a typically straight white male. I'm not sure why it has to be that. I never bothered to ask Blofeld if he was in fact straight. For all we know, he could have actually been into buggering cats. It would certainly explain a lot. Another more common trope, for bad guys especially, is that they are British, or to be specific, English. There is something universally accepted that we all quite enjoy, myself included, where I really like it when the bad guy is really, really posh. So posh that I just want to cave his head in. Which, oddly enough, every morning I look at myself in the mirror and say to myself, one must not cave one's skull in. One must not cave one's skull in. One must not cave one's skull in. Followed up by, they're laughing with you. They're laughing with you. They're laughing. The third trope that's quite common with the evil baddies of the movies, where there has to be, for a lot of films, a bad guy to give that story a boost. Along with love story, of course, that's quite common. Even in political films, which baffles me. The really common trope, though, is the disfigurement. That then creates the story arc that either makes you want to like the bad guy more or not. Character development is key for a lot of people who like a story, a good story, one where you can try and understand why the bad guy or bad girl, naughty girl, is the way they are. And one of the best ways to enable that story to develop is through a disfigurement. Now, we have this article here from The Telegraph, with the thumbnail is a picture of Heath Ledger's Joker. The thing with Heath Ledger's Joker is it's never explained how he got his scars actually. And as the Joker has a number of ways he got his scars, let's pretend the Jack Nicholson one never happened, shall we? It wasn't, yeah. And let's not think too much about the Joaquin Phoenix one. Is that how you pronounce his name? Yeah. Because I've only seen pictures, and I'm not going to hold much stock in it. Although I'm sure it's going to be better than Jared Leto's. The point is the article uses a thumbnail for a character we don't even understand enough. All we know about this particular version of the Joker is that he wants to prove everyone has the potential to be corrupted, and he's knucking futs. The title for the article reads, British Film Institute, or BFI, says it will no longer fund films which star villains with facial scarring. Now this is to defeat the stigma around disfigurement, and the first film they reference in the article is From Darth Vader to Scar in The Lion King, Unfortunately, and I'm going to nitpick at the article slightly here, BFI actually backs Star Wars, to the point where they have Star Wars days. They fund it. They did not, however, fund Star Wars or The Lion King. Perhaps to make this point better, you should have gone with British movies that are funded by BFI, or given funding from the BFI. The BFI is backing the hashtag #IamNotYourVillain campaign launched by Changing Faces, one of the charities the Telegraph is supporting as part of this year's Christmas appeal. As the first organisation to support the project, the BFI is leading the effort to remove the stigma from facial disfigurement by casting actors who do not fit the traditional Hollywood aesthetic. Well, we all have to make a star somehow, and broadening one's palette might help. I would, however, point out that the very first thing this makes me think of when you are removing funding for films based on whether or not they have a character with a facial disfigurement is that you look like you're virtue signalling, as opposed to supporting a campaign regardless of how noble it actually is. You don't stand up for something by distancing yourself from something else. Perhaps instead talk to the writers and say, you could make your character, your bad guy, more endearing if you didn't have a scar. Now just figure a way to make his character interesting, or her character, of course, and we'll give you some money. Is that too obvious? Or give the good person a facial disfigurement as well, and the stigma is totally removed. In fact, the good and bad people might in fact become bum chums, which would be like totes amazing. I'm trying to think of bad guys who didn't have facial disfigurements, and the only one I can think of is Voldemort, but that's only because it's not really a disfigurement, considering what he did to himself to get to where he was, I think. Doesn't matter, I guess. Ben Roberts, the BFI's deputy CEO, said, "Film is a catalyst for change, and that is why we are committing to not having negative representations depicted through scars or facial difference in the films we fund." That sounds incredibly boring. You are literally trying to create a movie industry of a blank canvas with nothing on it. This isn't, quotes, contemporary art. We just stare at it and envision whatever we want on it. Envisage, yes. Whatever we want to see on the canvas. That is so boring. This campaign speaks directly to the criteria in the BFI diversity standards, which call for meaningful representations on screen. Oh, for fuck's sake. We fully support Changing Faces #IamNotYourVillain campaign, and urge the rest of the film industry to do the same. The problem with the message you are trying to pass off is, it kind of feels less like what you say in your diversity standards, where it actually says, the BFI diversity standards encourage equality of opportunity and tackle underrepresentation in the film industry as we recognize inclusion fuels creativity and makes good business sense. When you make it sound more like you actually encourage equality of representation. If everyone has the same chance to go somewhere or achieve something, that's it. That's equality. If they're not represented, then you're not pushing for equality of opportunity, are you? Which is further cemented with your criteria, where it says, to achieve the standards, projects must demonstrate commitment to inclusion and meet the criteria in at least 2 of the following 4 areas. A. On-screen representation. B. Creative leadership. C. Industry access and training opportunities. And D. Distribution and exhibition strategies. A being the main focus, I think, for all of us. You have equality of opportunity, but to qualify, one of the 4, even though you only have to qualify for 2, but one of the 4 is on-screen representation, which contradicts equality of opportunity. The BFI's decision is also part of a recent announced diversity commitment, which includes a 7% target for filmmakers with a disability. Changing Faces, who provide advice and support for people with visible difference, has welcomed the news as a positive step forward, quoted as saying, "The film industry has such power to influence the public with its representation of diversity, and yet films use scars and looking different as a shorthand for villainy far too often. It's particularly worrying to see that children don't tend to make this association until they are exposed to films that influence their attitudes towards disfigurement in a profoundly negative way." I'm not sure using scar from Lion King is a good representation of someone with a facial disfigurement. It, if anything, just looks like a different colour fur on his face. Seriously. I get the point about not wanting to just pigeonhole people with scars, but I would argue the majority of those in those films as bad guys themselves do not have the scars they are makeup and prosthetic. And I would also argue that a number of the characters that do have the scars have them for valid reason within the story arc they are trying to tell. Whether it be Freddy Krueger for being incinerated, Two-Face, we all know how that happened in the courtroom, Deadpool, of course, covered in scars from his cancer and his healing factor, Nick Fury, with that scar over his one good eye. You could possibly argue Jigsaw, but I think his scars or injuries were incurred near death, certainly the skull injury. Blofeld, as earlier mentioned, General Scar, the Phantom of the Opera. The article earlier mentioned Darth Vader, but I would argue his scars were never seen until right at the end of Return of the Jedi. You could argue they were introduced during Revenge of the Sith, but we're not going to do that because the prequels never happen. So another counter to all the other points made so far is that having a facial disfigurement is not exclusive to villains. Deadpool being a prime example of somebody who owns the fuck out of it. Anyway, I would love to know what all of you think about this, about the idea of only funding things based on whether or not they are not only inclusive, but whether they have equal representation, regardless of opportunity, because as we've noticed, the BFI contradicts itself ever so slightly. So please let me know in the comments below. I hope you all have a lovely Sunday, and thank you all for listening.